Welcome to Vanguard, a podcast of radical traditionalism. Here's your host, Richard Spencer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Vanguard. And welcome back as well, Andy Nowicki. How are you, Andy?
Hello, Richard. Good. Good to be here.
Good. I'm glad you're on the program once again. Well, today we're going to discuss the scandal du jour, or I should probably say de jour for our French listeners, because this one will last many days. I actually think the scandal does have legs, and we're going to be talking about it for at least a month. And that is, of course, the Todd Akin controversy. Todd Akin is a relatively unknown congressman from Missouri, or Missouri, as they say down in those parts. And he is running for an open Senate seat, and he's actually in a very close race with the Democrat, which it appears to be essentially a 50-50 race, although he has a slight edge within the margin of error. So this is a very important race for everyone involved. And I'm sure most of our listeners, or all of them, have heard of what has happened. This past Sunday, Todd Akin was on a local talk show, and he uttered these, let's say, seemingly benign...
Infamous words.
Yeah, they're now certainly infamous. I mean, he'll be wearing these words around his neck for the rest of his career. However, it's not like he demanded, the murder of the Pope or something. It's a kind of seemingly benign words. However, they just were taken. They have a life of their own, and they're now never. He'll never live this down. Let me just read his exact words, because what I want to do is that I think Andy and I can kind of unpack what's happening. I remember when I was in graduate school, we would always learn to do close readings and unpack, little sentences or paragraphs and, draw out all the Freudio-Marxist threads. Yeah. But I think we should do that again with this statement. So let me read it. Thus spoke Todd Akin. It seems to be, and he's referring to rape, and the interviewer basically said, well, what do you feel about rape, abortion in the case of rape? And Todd Akin is, of course, a staunch pro-lifer, but this is also the tricky question. Todd Akin said, It seems to be, first of all, from what I understand from doctors, it's really rare. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut the whole thing down, end quote. That sentence launched 1,000 ships. Let me just, I think there are a lot of levels to this, but let me just start out the conversation by saying one important thing. And I'm not going to take Todd Akin's attacker's side in this case, but I think we should give a certain amount of credit to people who are attacking Todd Akin. It seems from his statement that he's more or less claiming that there aren't any pregnancies involved with rape, that the female body kind of, kicks out the sperm, it doesn't allow fertilization, and so there's nothing to worry about. It's not really a moral dilemma. And I would just say, I think it's worth saying this, that there are millions of cases of women being impregnated by their violent attackers. And they are in a hellish situation in which they might birth or raise a child, and they'll look into its eyes and see their attacker. And that is truly hellish. And so I think Akin is rightly criticized for trying to pretend, or apparently trying to pretend that doesn't happen. Because it does happen, and that's a hellish situation, and I'm sure a lot of women choose abortion as a way to just bring closure to this situation. And they would, in other situations, not make that choice. And I think, wherever you are in this issue, I think you should offer them a little bit of sympathy. I mean, that is a truly hellish situation, and, it's going to bring up terrible ambivalences about your own flesh and blood, and that is truly awful. So, that said, I think we should always give the other side, their due. I think Todd Akin was wrong in suggesting that. And it's funny, I'll just mention this as well. I was actually doing some mild research on the subject, and there actually are situations in which a female body will reject semen And obviously we've heard of countless cases where, a couple who are married in love, they're having fertility problems, yet there's no physical problem with either the man or the woman. And it just seems like they keep striking out or, stepping on each other's toes. So obviously there are situations in which a female will reject semen. And that is clear. But, again, they're
involuntarily, though, not
right.
I mean, like Akin's words, it seems like he's suggesting that a woman has this capacity to access this part of her that just decides to reject the sperm of a rapist, and that's clearly not
right.
The article that you are making reference to.
Yeah.
What that article said.
Yeah, I tweeted an article that actually talks about this, and so clearly there's something there, but I think Akin is just simply wrong. I mean, obviously trauma can bring on a miscarriage. I mean, we've seen that in many, instances, but, again, it's just,
right.
he seems to be grasping at straws or trying to almost make the ethical problem go away or something by this. So anyway, I think no more needs to be said on that unless you want to throw in something there. I just think that, he's not really on sound footing there. But
no,
go ahead.
I would agree. I would just add that I am pro-life. I'm Catholic, and I mean I acknowledge all of what you're saying. But if life, on the other hand, if life begins at conception, then of course that's it's still life, even no matter how it was conceived. It's still human life, and of course this is something difficult for politicians to if it's something you believe, then it just comes down to doctrine or your understanding of natural law. But I fully acknowledge that for a politician, trying to who is 100% against abortion in all cases, the issue of rape is a difficult one to cover, and it does sound to me like in this case, this particular politician was, as you say, just trying to make that particular complication go away. It seemed really, in a really strikingly, staggeringly incompetent manner. That just floors me. I wonder how this guy ever got to be elected if he didn't understand that saying something like this was going to, backfire heavily.
Yes.
I mean, that's the only caveat I would throw in. But I know that for the majority of the voters, even in a conservative state, I'm sure this is a very difficult aspect of the pro-life plank, if you will, to get to be convincing about to the majority.
Yeah. Yes. I'm afraid I find Akin, he probably is kind of stupid. Politicians, they seem to be evil or stupid. So he might be on the stupid side, which maybe he's
right.
Maybe he's not evil. I don't know. Some of them are evil and
or
stupid.
both. Could be both.
Yeah. But anyway, I don't know. I'm not really against Akin. I'm sure he is, a decent person. But let's get at this issue, because what I found fascinating was the word legitimate. That was basically the operative word, and it's kind of funny. And so let me just reread that part of the sentence. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut the whole thing down. Okay. What he clearly meant in that instance was that this is what, by the word legitimate, he meant violent, forcible rape.
Yeah.
He meant someone, a burglar sneaking into someone's house and beating up a woman and raping. Like, that's what he clearly meant. And then he has a kind of theory that the fertilization won't take place. But then, basically, on Monday, when he was having to apologize for these statements, he went on to Mike Huckabee's radio program, and he affirmed that he's going to stay in the race and all that kind of stuff. But he also said no rape is legitimate. So the word legitimate now means like good or like justified. So I was almost thinking that, and it's a funny thing because essentially, if he had just used the word violent rape, maybe this would not. It probably would have caused a stir, but it might have caused less of a stir because this seems to be a case of liberals consciously, maybe, or at the very least, misreading what he is saying, and they're almost claiming that there's like legitimate rape. So that this guy is some like backwoods, Cretan thug who's kind of like.
Sometimes you're justified in taking a woman by force. Like that's what he's really saying.
He's like, somehow. Well, if you want to teach a woman a lesson, then rape is fully justified, and pregnancy won't. But he clearly didn't mean that. And then so apparent as opposed to what he should have done is say that. The word legitimate wasn't a good word choice because it confused some people, but I'm talking about violent rape and so on and so forth. But instead he said no rape's legitimate. So he makes him, it's almost like he's insinuating that like, I really am a backwoods thug who rapes, all sort of men, women, and animals at will.
Yeah.
But,
or it certainly leaves room for even more confusion about what he did mean the first time around.
Right. So the guy, he stuck his both feet in his mouth now. But let me just say this though. So the guy is really not handling himself well, and I think someone there needs to hire someone of intelligence with his PR so they can just get this straight. And I almost admire him for standing up to Mitt Romney and the GOP establishment, but he needs to do it right. But this is the next issue, which I think is important. And I said and you agreed. I said at the beginning of the program that Akin is in the wrong, trying to seemingly pretend that rape fertilizations don't occur. But what I think has really gotten the goat of feminists and liberals of all kind and leftists, whatever, is not that fertilization question, that kind of scientific question. What really got their goat was that he brought up somewhat indirectly the distinction between, let's call it violent rape on the one hand, and let's call it, I don't like this term at all, date rape on the other. And what he is basically, the distinction he's making is between, truly using brutality in order to have your way with a woman and something that is much more ambiguous and I think is something that is used to ruin many young men's lives in a totally immoral fashion. And that is this date rape idea. And so, look, I went to undergraduate college. I'm well aware that there are some terrible people who will, put medication in a girl's drink and make her pass out and go. Needless to say, that is illegal, and I hope anyone who does that is arrested. I mean, that's terrible behavior. But that's, there's also this case of people, let's say they're both drinking, and they go home to the girl's dorm room or apartment, and she thinks it's fun at the time, they have sex, and then she wakes up, and whether she feels guilty or she doesn't like the guy, she thinks her friends are going to make fun of her, whatever, she just decides to claim that, this was not consensual. And, you could go through the laws in different countries, different states, but there are ways that you can have essentially consensual sex, and it can still be deemed rape afterward. And I mean consensual by the man on the street definition, i.e., like, you go to someone's apartment and you're kissing and drinking wine and you end up having sex. Yeah. So, the
Julian Assange thing, what happened apparently happened in his case.
Well, yeah, we can go on a little tangent here. correct me if I'm wrong, because I did look into this, but essentially that's a situation where he went home with a woman who seemed to actually have approached him and been flirted with him. They went home and then they had sex using a condom, and then the next morning they decided to have a little morning delight or whatever, and he just didn't bother with a condom, and then now that's rape. I mean, give me a break. Whatever you want to feel about Julian Assange, he did not rape. I mean, if that is what's happened, he did not rape that woman. That is just crazy. Maybe he should have worn a condom, fine, but this is just insane to claim that that's rape. And you see how some of these, in order to justify feminist legalisms, we just work ourselves into, tie ourselves in knots and just go insane, essentially.
So you think this is, to feminists, and liberals, you think this is more about rape than it is about abortion? That's the thing that's really flipping their switch right now?
Yeah, I do. And it might be unconscious, but I think that is flipping their switch. I think because once you bring up this issue that not all rapes are equal, and there are ambiguous, there are definitely ambiguous cases. What if a girl is like passed out drunk and barely, look, of course there's ambiguous cases. There are ambiguous cases in life. There's things, if you had a drink and then you're driving and you run over someone or you're driving, that's a kind of ambiguous case. Is it really murder, or is it, it's very ambiguous. Mm-hmm. And so life is ambiguous. So yes, but I think these feminists don't want any ambiguity. It's essentially women, whatever they say goes. Sorry to sound sophomoric or something, but whatever. If a woman wants to be, if women can do anything, they can involve S&M, which might even involve violence, but that's fine if they like it. But if a guy picks up a woman at a bar and she doesn't like it the next morning, he should be thrown in jail. What I mean? So essentially, that is the worldview that feminists want.
Is it that rape, the incidence of violent rape, brings to mind for feminists the things that they'd rather not think about, which are the differences, the natural genetic differences between the sexes?
Yeah.
And is that why it's something they? I mean, of course, any moral person knows that rape is bad. People have always known that. Mm-hmm. People who are moral, upright people. Mm-hmm. But do you think that's what maybe, in the case of for feminists, the incidence of rape underlines the fact that men are stronger and I don't know, in some cases, in the more ambiguous cases, that maybe there's such a thing as men who are charming enough to talk a woman into doing something that she doesn't, that she later regrets.
Yeah, they probably don't like the idea of female fragility, the idea that a James Bond type really can talk a woman into bed. I just don't. Yeah, I think they don't. I think it does bring up this whole can of worms, and I think you're right. If you want to get to the very bottom of the can of worms, to mix a metaphor, it really is just human differences.
I like that.
Well, because I think it really is human differences and sex differences in the sense of. Men at the end of the day are going to have a kind of positive, outwardly directed sexuality. It's the chase, or you go after women. I remember when I was, just out of college and with some of these guys, we would literally be getting on the train to go track down women in Europe whom we met at a bar or something. It's totally stupid nonsense. Men just have this. It's a chase-like aspect. You go after someone, and I think the feminine sexuality is kind of more negative. It's receptive. It's you can't imagine you can imagine two 22-year-olds being like, let's get on the train and go find those girls we met last night at 2 a.m. you can't imagine like females like going after. And whenever they do that and they're that assertive, you think of them as kind of like men, essentially. They're they're exceptional.
And and so then there's that whole complaint gets raised. Of course, when men do it, they're studs, and women do it, they're sluts. And it's double standard and all that.
And that is a double standard.
They raise that whole complaint.
Yeah.
But the reason why that double standards are useful. It's useful to point out double standards if you're comparing apples and apples. But of course, in this case, when you're not, when there are, as you say, certain discrete, probably biological differences between the sexes, then it makes sense to hold the men and women to different standards in this sense.
Yeah, I mean, men and women are different, and that's why there's the stud-slut double standard. And I admit that the stud-slut double standard is unfair. I mean, I fully admit that, and it's not really admirable either. But it's also life. It's based on reality. It's not socially constructed. It's based on a fundamental difference between female and male sexuality. And I think this is another, now that we're kind of on this tangent, which is a really interesting tangent, I think there's a really basic difference, asymmetry, in terms of rape. And, when you think about this, I remember seeing some article about there was some 14-year-old boy who was raped by his social studies teacher. And, it's like, oh, yeah, he must be really traumatized. No, he's not traumatized. Yeah. This is like the greatest thing that ever happened to him. It's like rape is awesome. Your 30-year-old teacher seduces you. Like, please, I
hope nobody ever takes your words out of context here. Rape is awesome. So nobody isolates that. One quote of yours and says, here is what Richard Spencer said on his podcast.
Yeah, and maybe what I mean by this is that 14-year-old boy is not going to be traumatized. He is a little embarrassed and confused, sure, but it's really not going to be traumatized. However, I think there really is a difference. If there's a 30-year-old social studies male teacher and he takes away the virginity of a 14-year-old girl, I think she will be traumatized, and I think that is terrible. Again, I think both teachers should be fired. I mean, that's a given. I mean, you can't be having sex with your students, for goodness sakes.
Right.
But, so that's fine. But I don't think the boy is going to be traumatized. I think he's going to slap hands, with his friends in gym. I think that young woman is going to be traumatized. And the reason is that women are different. And, I think our, egalitarian society wants to pretend that we're all just cogs that can be plugged in here and there. But no, I mean, we're
blank slates.
Yeah, we're blank slates, but no, we're not. And so I think that there's just a basic asymmetry in all these questions. And to get back to the matter at hand, I think Akin, kind of brought one of these up, and maybe unconsciously it just got the goat of all these women.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I think that's astute.
Oh. Well, thank you, Andy. I'm I agree that I am right.
Now, something we were talking about earlier before the broadcast was I don't know if you wanted to get into this, but you were talking about how some of the people on our side were just reflexively taking Akin's side in this affair, or jumping to his defense.
Yeah, let me talk about that. One thing, I did notice that Scott McConnell, who used to be my boss over at the American Conservative, he has a kind of a very interesting take on this whole thing, where he basically just he says that Akin, unlike most Republicans, is a genuine pro-lifer. He clearly wants life in all cases, and he means it when he says it's pro-life. And he didn't really get the memo that when you're a Republican, you just claim to be pro-life, but then you don't do anything. So I think I agree with Scott. I think Akin is somewhat admirable in that he really means his convictions. But this is what I was noticing. Some less interesting defenses of Akin is that I was just getting these on my Twitter feed, and I'm not subscribed to any conventional conservatives Twitter feed, so I just noticed some of these people who are definitely alt-right, so to speak, in their worldview. We're kind of like, I hate the Republican Party. Akin's good. He should say more extreme things. Was kind of one of these things. And my view, I have to say, my gut reaction was not positive towards Akin because I basically feel that Akin is probably one of those conservatives that he might be a decent family man, but he's also just like itching to vote for war with Iran or. All these terrible things. So I'm not really, I can't say that I'm really a great backer of him.
Right.
But then also, I guess my general point is I'm reminded of Sam Francis when I hear all these enemy of my enemy like justifications. And, Sam Francis is certainly one of my heroes. He is he was a brilliant guy. After he received his PhD from the University of North Carolina, he actually became a conservative operative and worked for congressmen. And he also was a kind of almost prototypical hard-boiled conservative columnist for the Washington Times. And he was essentially in the 90s more or less kicked out of the movement for his views, which his racial views, but also even beyond his racial views, just his willingness to go there, kind of call a spade, and really not mince words when it came to a lot of these things. And so he was basically kicked out of the movement. And he would remark that, during the 80s when he was flying high, he would often willingly get the backs of, support the religious right when they were being attacked by liberals. And then he noticed that when he was being attacked by liberals, the religious right was silent and they just kind of slowly walked out of the room without saying anything. And so I basically...
You're on your own here, guys.
Right. And so, I don't know, I guess I just have this... My gut reaction is not to support Akin. My gut reaction is, A, this is the kind of person who's going to vote for more global war. Yeah. B, if any of these people who were supporting him were ever accused of racism or anti-Semitism, Akin would join in with their attackers.
Oh yeah. So, well, I mean, I say, oh yeah, I should give him more of the benefit of the doubt, but I somehow can't because, I mean, I think of Derbyshire when he got jumped all over, for something he wrote at Talkie Mag, and then immediately, just without any discussion at all, without any momentary grasping or attempt to put things in perspective. Immediately he got kicked off of National Review Online. And, that's the typical thing. If a liberal attacks, somebody on the right for being quote-unquote racist, then the National Review types and the mainstream Republican types say, yeah, he is a racist. He should get out of here. We don't want to have anything to do with him. So yeah, I definitely see what you're saying, and I would imagine that would definitely be the case here with with this guy. Although again, I don't know for sure, but I am 98% positive that that's what he would do. That would be his reflexive reaction.
Yeah, just to go to the Derb situation, I remember just reading some of those things on the blogs, and they were basically like, I only criticize National Review for not expelling him earlier. Like they're very outside of a few people like Mark Stein, no one had they were just piling on and just I just it seems like when someone's down and out, you should always try to find something good to say about them. But I just really...
it was pathetic. It was just the herd mentality. I mean, it sickened me. It truly did.
It did sicken me, and I just think it kind of, it's all you need to know about who those people are. You know, so that's basically my view. They're just all terrible, and you can't really, you know, you can't have an alliance with someone like. I mean, anyway, that's a whole other issue.
Well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens. You know, you say he's in a close race right now. If I was more of a political junkie, which I'm definitely not, but if I were one, I could see, you know, it'd be interesting to watch, because is this something, are his supporters going to perceive him as persecuted and come out more in force to vote for him now? Could that possibly happen?
This is a good question. I'm glad you mentioned this, because, you know, Missouri is a real red state, and you know, so it is interesting. Like, is he gonna become a real cause for these red staters, or are they as cowed by PC as the rest of America, and so they're gonna jump on him, or actually, does this really motivate people? I mean, I really think I think Richard Nixon understood this. People vote against things. They vote on the basis of hate.
Sure.
And so I wonder if there are all these, you know, women who were not really interested in this year's election, but they just, you know, they have some fantasy or nightmare of, you know, Akin, who's a Ku Klutzer, and you know, he wants all women to be raped and impregnated, and you know, they have some weird, totally nonsensical, you know, image of him as, you know, dragging women out of their homes, and, you know, things like
the typical liberal nightmare imagery that surrounds legitimate conservatives, pro-life conservatives.
You're in need of some legitimate rape.
Well, I mean,
there, honey.
It kind of makes me think of this might be a strange metaphor to draw, but I remember back in 1999-2000, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I remember when the John Rocker news broke. That was around December, January, I think, maybe December of 99 or January of 2000, where he gave this interview where he said all these allegedly racist things and so forth, and was just raked over the coals as no athlete has ever been in sports history.
Yeah.
And then the following year, you know, everybody was expecting, you know, people to be against him in droves, but it turns out that when he would come running from the bullpen to the mound to save a game in Atlanta, people would cheer uproariously. I mean, they would cheer him like they hadn't cheered him before. So it was an interesting, and of course, a lot of people hated him too. You know, in other places, in other parts of the country. But it was an interesting illustration of what you're saying. This kind of you know, reaction, this kind of resentment of, you know, don't you tell us who we can who we can cheer for, and you know what person we're supposed to admire and who we're supposed to hate, you know. And it sort of brought out the whole Southern pride thing, as you know, because Rocker was a Georgia native, and you know, who'd said all these things that were politically incorrect. So it's interesting, as you say, to see, and to me, there's something even a little heartening about it, to see, you know, this kind of natural defiance come out in people, and
I agree.
You know, maybe it'll happen here. I don't know.
Yeah, they're not totally lost. You know, it's what I found most interesting about that Rocker situation, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he basically gave an interview in the New York Times or something where he said, I can't stand being in New York City because when you go to the subway, one person has purple hair and the other has a bone through his nose.
Yeah.
He said something like that. And it wasn't even really racial, although maybe it was kind of racial. But essentially it was just not politically correct. But after he said those, he was suspended and put into therapy. So it's kind of like this. It's almost this nightmare of, like, people would hear this radio program, and, like, these men in white coats would come in and take me away, and I'd be put into diversity training for a year. And then I'd come out and, you know, after being lobotomized, and then I would be like, I love black women or something. You know, it's almost really, it's funny.
Yeah, and in fact, even Bush, who at the time was a candidate, George W. Bush, even he distanced from rocker and said, you know, I'm glad, you know, Major League Baseball really needs to get this guy some help. You know, I remember him going on the record saying that. I mean, gosh, you want to talk about alienating your base, you know, or I guess for him it was what he thought was a politically expedient thing to do, or he didn't want to die on that hill or something, which,
well, I think also
from a political standpoint might have been wise. I don't know. But
yeah, I think
it's very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably some like these people like Bush, they don't want to alienate some of those urban white professionals, you know, the stockbrokers who vote Republican or something. But I don't know. Still, yeah, it truly is. That was a remarkable situation. I just, you know, he needs some help. Well, Andy, thanks for being on the program, and why don't we just put a bookmark in the conversation, and I'm sure we'll have to return to the Akin controversy again 3 months from now when liberals are still complaining about it.
We'll see where this goes.